Hey everyone, and welcome to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and we have a great show for you tonight. We have been diving into a bunch of different topics with the Courage 365 show, and we've also been hitting some current events, and we are going to be doing that again in this show. If you're tuning in and you're not sure what the show is about, we're going to be talking about Cuties, the new show on Netflix, and we're going to be discussing the sexualization of children in this film and otherwise in our culture. This is going to be a really important subject. If you are a parent, you're going to want to listen to this. This is going to be important stuff because we have guest expert Maureen Farrell Garcia that's going to be on the show tonight, and she really has a good understanding of how predators think about sexualization of children, and this is going to be just, if you're a parent, you're going to want to watch this. And I would highly, highly recommend that you hit the share button right now, whether you're watching on Twitter or Facebook. Maybe you're tuning in live on YouTube and you want to just copy that link and drop it in some of your social media, because we want as many people as possible to hear this message because it's really important. Now, with that said, there's going to be some adult themes in this conversation, and so this might not be the right time to have young children tuning in and listening. However, this is going to be very relevant to what young children are going through, so parents, you're going to want to tune in and share this with your other parents in your life. But yes, we're going to be welcoming I'm sorry, I got a little tongue twisted there, guys. Maureen Farrell Garcia onto the show. And hey, Maureen, how are you doing? Sorry about that tongue twister there.
That's fine. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing so good. And this is not the first time you've been on the Courage 365 show, and we are so honored that you decided to come back and join us. And your last show with us was excellent. We got so many views on that because your content is just spot on. So we're not going to go over your backstory and all that. Everybody, go and watch some of the back episodes of Courage 365. You can find that on our website, courage365.org. If you scroll down on the page, you'll find where the back episodes are if you want to hear Maureen's story and some of her background of wisdom. But we're not going to focus on that tonight because we've talked about that in the past. Instead, I'm going to just go ahead and read your bio, Maureen, and then we'll just kind of dive right in because there's a lot to say on this subject, and yeah, it's important. So, Maureen Farrell Garcia is a captivating speaker and workshop facilitator who combines research and personal experience to empower her audience. With empathy and wit, Maureen connects with her audience, offering her knowledge of abuse dynamics and insights for creating safe spaces and healing from abuse. Her writings have appeared on various websites, including Christianity Today, CBE International, Converge, Christ and Pop Culture, and the Institute for Collective Trauma and Growth. So, like I said, we have a true expert on the show, and Maureen, I just want to really kind of dive into this with you. First of all, have you seen Cuties?
Yes. Yeah, I did. I watched it with one of my daughters after we found out about the controversy around it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to watch it this afternoon as well, just to make sure I could also have, accurate information, because what I've seen online after reading the show, that there's actually some disinformation out there, tipping towards conspiracy theories that I don't think are quite in line what actually was going on. That being said, there are some problematic themes that we want to address. And I was hoping that since you've seen the show, maybe people aren't feeling comfortable watching it, but it's important for them to know the premise. Would you mind just kind of sharing the storyline? Yeah, just kind of sharing what it was about for everyone.
Right. Putting aside all the problematic stuff, the story is basically, it's a very typical coming of age story, except the main character is, she's kind of navigating two different cultures. She lives in France, so you have a culture that is very free and open with sexuality. And then she also is from a culture. She's Senegalese, from Senegalese. So that's much more traditional, pious, very modesty focused, very domestic focused. And so she's trying to come of age as an 11-year-old in a culture that's telling her that she needs to be pious and modest. And the other culture is telling her she needs to be sassy and sexy. And she's trying to navigate how to do that. And in the middle of that, there's a bunch of stuff going on with other characters, especially her mother. She's watching her mother come to grips with and deal with the grief of being a first wife who is now going to be relegated to a lesser position because her husband is marrying a new younger wife. And so the main character, Ami, is trying to deal with that too. She sees her mother's grief and she sees her, what these expectations in that culture can lead to. So, but it's very typical coming of age, and it touches on a lot of themes and important issues, and the whole trying to live in a dual culture and having dual identities, and how do you kind of integrate that and become who you actually are as opposed to who everyone around you wants you to be.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good synopsis. And yeah, just what I saw going, watching it first, just this huge contrast. She's trying to figure herself out, figure her
Yes.
body out, what her place is
Mm-hmm.
in the world. And she's coming
Yeah.
from this very conservative, traditional religion
Mm-hmm.
that modesty is really highly esteemed.
Yep.
And it's not so much a choice, it's more of
Right.
these are the expectations, at least in this
Yes.
scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Not placing that on every person, but then contrasting that with like this highly like showing every bit of your body and that being expected. Right. And just there was a very stark contrast between those two worlds. Yes. And I think you kind of summed up that really, really well. So I'd like to kind of, before we get into some of the more problematic themes, I'd like to just talk about the movie as a whole, because I think what the director was trying to do was create a valuable conversation. And we'll talk about some ways where we think that mark was missed. But before we do that, what do you think the director was trying to portray? What do you feel like was her goal? Why do you think this movie was created?
So the director and the screenwriter, her intentions are good intentions, and she would agree with us on many things. Give me a second. But she herself, she's drawing from experiences that are autobiographical. Having dual identities, being Senegalese and French. Her name is, give me a second here. All right, now it's my turn to mess up a name. All right, Maiuna Decore. Okay. So she was trying to communicate that social media is dangerous to young girls, and particularly the culture of hypersexualization that is a Western kind of culture thing, whether you're in France or America. Right. The videos that kids see are very hypersexualized. And one of her statements in one of the interviews she did was she was talking about how children will see things in social media and then they'll imitate them, but not understand the meaning of what it is that they're imitating.
Yes.
And so she wanted to kind of highlight that children are naive and innocent, and her belief is that they should stay that way for as long as possible, but that what we're doing in our culture is putting all these expectations on them about what it is to be female, what it is to be a woman, what it is to be affirmed as a female and a woman. And preteens need lots of affirmation. And if the only affirmation they see women getting has to do with their sexuality, then that's what they're going to be trying to imitate.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And one of the other contrasts that I saw with what you said it really eloquently, with children, they don't know, like they see something but they don't know what it means, so they'll act on something that they don't understand the whole background. And one of the scenes was them not understanding oral sex, or not understanding what condoms are and how STDs are passed. And So there
Right.
was this, again, a contrast of like complete lack of sexual
Yep.
understanding of like the mechanics
Yes.
and the workings of sex and consent and
Right.
all those things,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
while also behaving in ways that are sexualized. And I think that's really
Yeah.
true of what's going on today in the broader culture is while sexual, like outward sexual movements and
Mm-hmm.
actions and, you know, words and connotations
Yeah.
are like forefront, there's still a mismatch with under the
Yes.
surface. There's a lot of
Yeah.
confusion on what
Yep.
sexuality is, how to navigate that safely. um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's like the most dangerous thing for children these
Yes.
days is
Mm-hmm.
when you're pressured by culture, by friends, by bullies at school. And there was some scenes that I think constituted bullying in there that
Absolutely. Yeah.
really
Mm-hmm.
encouraged the main character to, you know, become more sexualized. um, when you're seeing all that and there's that pressure, and yet you don't know how to keep yourself safe, you don't know what this means, you don't know
Mm-hmm.
how you could get pregnant, you like all those things in the middle of the movie. um, the main character, Ami, she has her period for the first time, and
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
know she was shocked by this, thought something was
Mm-hmm.
wrong, and um, so I think that really is the state of a lot of our youth today.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because it's exactly what you said. They see sexuality being performed,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't see what sexuality is usually for, the connection, the intimacy. It's just this performative stuff, whether it's dancing or it's in, an HBO show or something else. But what they don't know at all is anything about their actual body or
Mm-hmm.
other people's bodies, how they work, anything about sex education. There's a complete ignorance. And so you have children acting sexually, but completely ignorant of what it means and of of anything, and just having to do with it, like you said, with not knowing what condoms are, not knowing what certain sexual acts are. Now, I'm not saying that you go to all children and you start telling them, as soon as they can talk, what every sexual
Sure.
act is, but there should be age appropriate discussions and education about at least their body and how their body functions, and how
Right.
other people's bodies function too.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just an interesting kind of, it was interesting to see it being played out. Like when I was younger, you if you wanted to know something, you pretty much had to go ask an adult, because we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have you couldn't Google things up, and we
Right.
didn't have sexualized videos at that time.
Right.
um, so, you know, but mostly we were taught, just don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
To which, of course, the question is, do what?
Right.
Because you're
Exactly.
not telling us what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but it's an interesting thing, and she pulls it off really well. Again, if you remove all the problematic stuff, she really captures the girls, the four main actresses. They're kind of innocent, but like this kind of sassiness too. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a scene where they're trying to flirt with older boys, and
Right.
they clearly don't see that this could become a potentially dangerous situation for
Right.
them. But you're watching it and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
Right.
Because they seem to be inviting the boys to flirt with them and engage with them. And the
Right.
boys are like, no, you're too young
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying that girls need to be the ones to protect themselves. Our boys need to be taught,
Sure.
you
Sure.
know, don't violate younger girls. But
Right.
um, but it was interesting to see how she put this kind of all together, and how she
Mm-hmm.
had this main character who just looks so young navigate all this kind of heavy content.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Yeah, and that part of the movie, I thought like the idea behind it, this concept, it's so true to life. And you know, even kind of going back to what you said about parents needing to educate their children on things,
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes parents want to do that in an age appropriate way, but they don't even know when
Yes.
things are age appropriate.
Yep.
And I remember
Exactly. Yeah.
having a
Mm-hmm.
discussion with my mom about a
Mm-hmm.
young woman, and you know she was about 17 or so, and my mom was like,
Right.
well, 17-year-olds shouldn't know about oral sex. She shouldn't know about that till much later in life. And I was thinking,
Mm-hmm.
like, 17, that's almost an adult, number one.
Right.
And number
Mm-hmm.
two, like, do you not know what happens at high schools? Like, that is
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
is very
Mm-hmm.
common. So I think sometimes because parents want to keep their children naive, they don't even
Exactly.
realize what sexual acts they do need to talk about at
Right.
ages. And
Mm-hmm.
it talking about oral sex needs to happen way before 17,
Right.
because
Mm-hmm.
it's whether you want to try to shelter your kids or not, they're going to see stuff, they're going
Yeah.
to experience things, and if they don't have language to describe it, it's going to be hard
Right.
to talk about that with an adult.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I think that that's super important. But I think maybe we can kind of go back to this, theme that
Mm-hmm.
we've been talking about, but I think maybe we should address the elephant in the room, and that is,
Okay.
um, I think that the director's intent was probably good,
Yeah.
but there was a lot of sexualization of actors who were children, who were
Yes.
minors.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that sexualization, even with the positive educational pieces, was that sexualization of those young actors justified?
My go-to would be no sexualization of young people is
Yeah.
justified. So there's definitely sexualization happening.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the difficulty for me is if they were older teens, if they
Mm-hmm.
were adults, you could explain to them the premise of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to advocate for, and
Mm-hmm.
then they could consent to whether or not they were going to allow themselves to be sexualized in that scene or
Right.
those scenes. But children, by definition, cannot consent.
Exactly.
So it's an impossibility, even if you explain to them
Mm-hmm.
um, what the meaning is, what you're trying to do, how important this is. And even if they themselves have engaged in performative sexual dances or have seen this stuff
Mm-hmm.
and know all about it, no matter how mature they are in their cultural information about sex, developmentally, they're
Right.
not old enough to consent.
Right.
So the problem is then you have, Descourage is basically becoming complicit in the very thing she's critiquing, sexualization of
Right.
children. And so I understand that there's, she did it thoughtfully.
Mm-hmm.
She did research for more than a year. She talked to hundreds of girls, talked about their experiences, what it's like for them coming into their bodies changing, navigating their sexuality, navigating
Mm-hmm.
their families, dealing with all these expectations and hypersexualization. She took all that information and she made this great story. But the problem, of course, is, she sexualized children in
Yeah.
the execution of it. So the
Right.
story is great.
Yep.
It's a fantastic coming of age tale, but the
Yep.
execution of some of the scenes is really problematic. For instance, is there a way? There's one scene where they're kind of dancing, doing sexualized kind of video dancing, and the camera angles are
Mm-hmm.
looking up and doing close-ups of the girl's body parts.
Yep.
Now, I can understand that part of what she's doing there is emphasizing that they're children and their body parts are children's body parts. But the angles and the way it's done is exactly the same as what way too many filmmakers do when they
Yep.
sexualize a grown woman's
Yes.
body. So
Yes.
would there have been a way to capture them doing the dance,
Mm-hmm.
but have it look like children doing a dance as opposed to have it look like girls in a video doing a dance?
Right.
So I know
Right.
she also hired a psychiatrist to be on set with the girls to help them process what they were going through, to help them process the film coming out and people watching it and responding. So I know she was thoughtful about it. And I know
Right.
that she would agree with me that sexualization of children is a bad thing.
Right.
And that social media is very dangerous. But
Right.
again, the execution is that's
Yeah.
part of the
Even
problem.
if that was the intent, what actually went down wasn't
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's another conversation is sometimes we can have great intents,
Yeah.
but if we lack education about something, or if we blatantly choose, that
Yeah.
your intention doesn't equal what the impact is going to be on those young actors. or what the
Right.
impact is going to be on culture at large. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's a lot of different ways filmmakers could have talked about how to change this.
Right.
But, you know, something in my mind that just kind of came up was, what if instead the story had been set as, you know, they were like older teens and then they had adult actors playing, you know, teens or
Right.
something, and you might have been able to work with that with having consenting adults portraying this.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Right.
understand her goal was to try to show how pervasive. So I just think it was really disappointing, because I think we understand what her intent was, but it wasn't
Right.
okay. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
sexualizing children, even if your intention is good, like the intention doesn't matter at the end of the day. What was the impact? How did this affect children's lives? And
Right.
so
Mm-hmm.
that caused me a lot of concern,
Right.
personally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Absolutely. Um, It'd be interesting to see what the children actors say about their experiences years from now when they're adults.
Yes.
Um, One of the things that I know she wanted, which she's absolutely accomplished with the help of Netflix,
Mm.
is she wanted people talking about this.
Sure.
Um, and her intention is, if I get people talking about it, maybe we can change the cultures, we can shift it so that our
Mm-hmm.
girls aren't pressured so much with all this sexualization. So that was effective,
Right.
not
Right.
quite in the way she meant, but people are talking about it.
Right.
And you're absolutely right about you can have great intentions and you can have a little bit of knowledge. But if you don't know and educate yourself and inform yourself about things that are factually true
Right.
about things like child abuse or sexualization,
Yes.
you can actually inadvertently be causing more harm than good.
Right.
And I see that happen a lot with people who will think that they're advocating to
Mm-hmm.
protect children, and what they're actually doing is sharing and perpetrating, like not perpetrating, they're just advocating myths that
Mm-hmm.
make it easier for abusers to abuse. But they don't know they're doing that. They generally want to protect children, but they end up doing the opposite.
Yeah. It's kind of the idea of, you know enough to be dangerous. Like, you know enough
Yes.
to
Yes.
um,
Mm-hmm.
be heard in the conversation, but not to actually have the, I don't know, skills isn't the right word, but like knowledge, training to
Right.
really be helpful, because I think ultimately this is damaging to those young actors, actresses. And
Mm-hmm.
um I like what you said about asking them in a couple of years what this was like, because I was reading some of the um like the bios of the young actors. Some were like
Mm-hmm.
12, some were 14. Some of them, this was their very first time being
Yes.
filmed.
Yep.
And for this to be their first experience in the film world, how is that going to affect the way they believe their
Mm-hmm.
bodies can and should be treated, you know, as they keep
Right.
getting older?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's really concerning to me.
Yes.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's also problematic because people are reacting to the director and the screenwriter as if she was intentionally creating, child porn,
mm-hmm.
which then would, people are judging those actresses that are children.
Right,
Um, and, so those children are going to be thinking, wait, they think they're watching porn. Um,
right,
and, and what does that say about them? And what does that communicate to them?
right.
Um, so even how we critique the movie, we have to
Mm-hmm.
be careful that we're not attacking the personhood of the individuals involved in the
Right.
making of the movie who we wish were protected in the making of the movie.
Right, right. Because again, like what you said before, the children can't consent. So the children
Exactly.
in the film didn't do
Yeah.
anything wrong. It was the responsible adults around them that really failed, I think, and put them in a
Right.
dangerous
Mm-hmm.
situation. So that's a really good point. And that kind of leads me into the next question. And this is, I'd love for you to kind of educate our audience on the
Mm-hmm.
scale of, like, because sexual abuse is sexual abuse, but there's a
Yes.
scale and a continuum. And
Yes.
I think, like you just
Right.
said, it's important to use the proper language, because when we don't use the proper language to describe something, things get lost in translation. We can't effectively deal with different
Right.
forms of sexualization properly, but also it can give, like you said, children the wrong impression of what, like if we use a strong word for something that isn't that strong word, then it's going to give the
Right.
children wrong understanding. It's similar to if you tell a child, you know, kissing is sex. Well, it's
Yes.
not. And
Right.
so they're going to be wildly unprepared to understand what sex is, you know, and
Right.
so it's
Yeah.
important that we use proper terminology. And what I've heard thrown around, I think, again, well intentioned people, but calling this movie child porn. And I
Right.
think it's problematic. I think it's wrong. I think that the
Right.
children were sexualized. But what is the word for what happened in the movie? Is that porn? Is that not? Talk to us about this spectrum.
Right. Um, so let's start with sexualization and then we'll get to the pornography part. So the American Psychological Association, a number of years ago, I think in around 2007, 2008, they published a report about sexualization of girls. They had gotten a task force together to kind of examine this, define the terminology, see how our culture does this, how they hypersexualize things, how they sexualize girls, and then what the effects are, what kind of damage it is, and then what you can do to kind of mitigate that.
Right.
And in their report, they have basically like four different types of things, four elements or components of sexualization, and all four don't have to be present
Mm-hmm.
for sexualization of somebody to happen. You just need one. But they do talk about a difference. So, for instance, one of the things that they talk about that is a sexualization would be a 5-year-old walking through a mall wearing a t-shirt that says flirt. Now,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, that's not the same as child porn, but
Mm-hmm.
it is setting up some kind of sexual gender expectation on a child that is too young to even understand what flirt is.
Right.
Now, that child wearing that T-shirt is not necessarily going to be harmed by that, but
Sure.
that is a type of sexualization. And then there
Right.
are kind of like there are degrees of sexualization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Within this movie, you have a very serious degree of child sexualization. You're placing sexual behavior, clothing styles, performative sex things on children. So sexualization definitely happens. However, just because that sexualization will appeal to people who have pedophilia things or who are perverse in certain ways, that doesn't mean that it's pornography. And it
Right.
was nowhere near the intention of the director to create pornography.
Mm-hmm.
So the United States Department of Justice has a very specific definition of pornography that, yes, it is kind of open to interpretation,
Right.
but you would have to have explicit content for it to be considered pornographic. And that doesn't really, you know, sexualization, yes, the most severe type of sexualization, but not pornography. So,
Right. Right. And I think that's an interesting conversation too.
mm-hmm.
I appreciate everything you said about like different grades of sexualization, and I there's so many things I want to say because you just said a lot of good stuff there. So let me just start with that and just say, um, I think it's important that people understand that there's different levels of sexualization.
Yes.
Um, it's not. It's like just sexual assault in general. Okay, sexual assault
Yes.
could mean rape, but sexual assault could also mean unwanted touching,
Yes.
of somebody's
Mm-hmm.
shoulder. Like there's, um, if you've said no and they're sexualizing something on you and they're touching, that's sexual assault.
Right.
Um, and I think we need to understand this continuum, not um, because by not doing that, we don't realize how subtle behaviors can really be traumatic for people.
Yes.
If we
Absolutely.
only
Mm-hmm.
constitute penetration as sexual assault, then we're missing this broad range of things in between that are also harmful and can have long lasting
Absolutely.
effects. So that's why
Yeah.
it's important to name things properly.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't actually take away from the importance and the pain of what can happen to somebody on that continuum. but it
Right.
just labels it correctly so we can understand that trauma can happen anywhere in the spectrum. Um,
Exactly.
so,
Hmm.
yeah, I really appreciate what you said there. And I also think it's important what you mentioned about there will be pedophiles who see the movie and are turned on by it and look at it
Right.
for those reasons. There will also be people who look at women's ankles and,
Exactly.
you know, have
Yes.
sexual thoughts and lust and, want to. So I
Hmm.
think we need to also make that distinction that, again, it's not the girl's fault
Right. Hmm.
that they're being sexualized because they're underage girls. And just because it isn't pornography doesn't mean it's not problematic, and it doesn't need,
Right.
and it still needs to be addressed.
Right.
Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And then, kind of going along with that, a lot of people are talking about canceling Netflix. And
Right.
I'm wondering what your opinion is on that. I think the people who want to cancel Netflix, again, have good intentions. I think their
Yeah.
intentions are to stop this type of movie from happening, to stop child exploitation and abuse and sexualization. Do you think boycotting Netflix is going to be effective in that? If so, why? And if not, why?
Right. Okay. So I'm all for people not spending their money and giving their money to organizations that don't support their values. That's totally fine. If somebody wants to do that, that's great. So if you want to cancel Netflix, go ahead and do that. But canceling Netflix and the social media advocacy around canceling Netflix is not actually going to make an impact on whether or not children are being sexually abused and whether or not child porn, which is actually a very nice sounding euphemism for what we really mean, which is child sexual abuse and rape. It's
Yeah,
not going to make an impact on stopping that
right,
or on keeping actual child abuse and child rape from being shown and available on various platforms.
right.
Um, yeah. So,
That, I think that's a good point. I think a lot of times people are quick to boycott things, and if you feel in your heart that's something that you should do, I'm not saying you
mhm,
should or shouldn't, but I think you
right.
need to understand if you think that that's going to have this level of impact on
Yeah.
helping children, but it's really going to have this level of impact. I think you
Right.
just need to be aware of how much this
Right.
is really helping, and if you want to have this level of impact,
Right.
um,
Absolutely.
there's some other options of
Right.
how
Yeah.
you can do
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to maybe talk about that a little bit. If we want to have a
Hmm.
high level of impact on um, parenting children while keeping children safe, what are some ways that parents can discuss these things with their children, keep their children safe in this
Right.
sexualized world?
All right. So there's a number of things that we can do. So I would probably say the first thing that you need to do is you need to deal with your own stuff, your own taboos that you grew up with, your own inability to talk about certain things, say certain words. Like, I mean, I grew up a wonderfully repressed Irish Catholic, so I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
even say the word sex until I was in my 20s, right?
Right.
I had 3 children by the time I could say the word
Yeah.
sex out loud.
Yeah.
So you have to deal with your own stuff so that you can, like you said, this is super important. You said earlier, use accurate language to
Mm-hmm.
teach children at age appropriate levels. Children need to
Right.
know the names of the parts of their bodies. They need to know, just they need to have language. If somebody does do something to them, if
Yeah.
they do not have the vocabulary, it becomes a greater obstacle for them to disclose. And there's already
Right.
far too many obstacles for children to disclose
Yeah.
as it is. So you want to give them language to be able to disclose. You want to give them language to be able to describe their reality and what's happening. And to do that well, you need to deal with your own stuff.
Right. Right.
Because otherwise you're just going to be communicating shame or self-consciousness when you need to be communicating matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
There's no shame about bodily pleasure. There's no shame about your body parts. Um, it's just it is what it is, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so another thing that you need to do is you need to become informed with accurate information.
Yeah.
So, for example, I know people who are canceling Netflix, and again, more power to you. You want to cancel Netflix? I got no problem with that. But some people I know are canceling Netflix not just because of this film, but because they see this film as being some kind of symbolic, um,
Conspiracy theory.
yes, some kind of
Yeah.
conspiracy theory that that liberals are promoting child porn and trying to desensitize us, or that those people over there are doing this secret thing that
Right.
we need to fight against, and this is how we fight against it. And the problem with that is this actually, the more you do that, it's completely inaccurate information.
Right.
Um, Whether or not the conspiracy theory is true, it's still completely inaccurate to talk about that, because once you start saying that that political group, that type of Christian, that non-believer, that person over there, that ethnic group, once you say any of that and go, they commit child abuse, they make child porn, what you're actually doing is inviting pedophiles and predators into your community, because they know that you're not going to be looking for them there. So
Right.
if that's basically what you're doing, you're inviting them to come in, and you're going to be in denial that it's possible that within your community someone would do those things. So you're not going to see the signs that you need to be looking for, because you've already discounted that, you know, my type of people do not behave that way.
Right.
So you need to become informed about child abuse dynamics, and about how predators function and what they do and where they do it and how they do it, and how they do it in front of you.
Right.
You need to become, you know, more familiar with all that kind of stuff. So that would be the second thing. Should I go to
That's
the third thing?
Yeah, before we jump into the third thing
Yeah.
though, this is all so good. I just got to stop you there for a second. It is
Mhm.
interesting to me the amount of people that will cancel Netflix but will not cancel denominational churches who have been covering
Right.
up abuse
Right.
for decades. And
Mhm.
I think that again goes into Netflix is not us, but the church is
Exactly.
us. So,
Right.
and they'll give nuance to the church. And it's just
Yes.
like that's a
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
dangerous place to be. And we know statistically abuse happens everywhere,
Yep.
in
Mhm.
liberal environments, in conservative environments.
Yes.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
you don't need
Mhm.
a secret conspiracy for it to happen. Like it's been
No.
reported for since the world has existed. I mean,
Right.
we
Mhm.
see it
Yeah.
pedophilia in the Roman culture. We see it,
Yep.
just way, way back.
Yep.
It's always been there. So it's not a secret.
Right.
It's prevalent, and it can happen in your faith communities. It can happen in your family.
Yep.
It can happen in
Mhm.
your
Absolutely.
marriage. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's an excellent point. The other problem with conspiracy theories is, because you brought up the whole, you know, with churches, they'll protect and try to defend their own way too many
Mm-hmm.
churches. And part of that is because they don't really believe that the people in their group intentionally perpetrated some kind of an abuse.
Right.
They think the people out there intentionally do it, but in here, there's some mitigating circumstances that make it
Yeah.
not as bad, right?
Yeah.
But the difficulty is that when you start to think that there are conspiracy theories and secret things, then you're looking for, you know, hints in a Justin Bieber video that abuse may be happening, instead of listening to the kid sitting next to you who's disclosing to you, but you
Yes.
don't know that that's what they're doing because you haven't become informed about how children disclose.
Yes.
So you're missing things
Yes.
that are blatant, that are
Right.
telling you this happens and this is
Mm-hmm.
happening, but you're looking for things that aren't actually indicators of anything that's going to protect anyone or keep anyone safe or remove them from risk.
Right.
So,
100%. Thank you for that. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
And I don't know. We'll have to do a whole show on how conspiracy theories just allow abuse to thrive because, oh
Yes,
gosh.
yeah, mm-hmm.
And people are falling for it left and right during COVID. Guys, check your
Yep.
facts. Just seriously be careful with those things. But okay, you
Yes.
gave us two. Give us number three.
Okay, so number three is basically this. One of the things that that was great about Cuties is that the story is from the perspective of a Black girl who's a preteen. And in our American culture, we are used to reading and viewing stories where the main characters are mostly men. They're mostly white. White male is the default main
Yep.
character in most of our media consumption. But grown-ups and boys hardly ever put themselves in an imaginative position to identify with a young female character.
Right.
And if you want to talk to children and teenagers and help them learn to navigate what they're actually experiencing, you need to know what they're actually experiencing, which
Yes.
means that you need to watch and read books that are geared towards young adults, towards preteens, and you need to see what it is, what kind of pressures they're dealing with, and you need to become knowledgeable about that. So there's a bunch of young adult books that are excellent talking about sexual abuse or talking about sexual assault. So for example, 20 years ago, Laurie Halse Anderson's Speak was a great book. It's still a great book. A lot of people were uncomfortable with it and challenged it and wanted it banned because it has a scene where a girl is raped during a party. But it's not a titillating scene. It's obviously an assault from her perspective.
Right.
But people thought it was pornographic. Right. So, but the story is about how she grapples with that and how she heals over the next year. But it also shows like the effects of it on her. Another book that has a male character, which is actually not young adult, but a lot of young adults read it, is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. The main character is Charlie. Charlie is a very kind of reserved teenage boy. He's really sweet and thoughtful, but every once in a while he'll snap and have a rage attack. It's usually because he's trying to protect someone. But there are themes of sexual abuse, and you get to see played out in this character, some of what this might look like if a boy has been sexually abused. There's a book that's not about sexual abuse, but has the same kind of dual identity thing happening as Cuties would be The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. You have a girl who is going to a private school, lots of white friends, they all have money, but she lives in a place in California that is, impoverished with mostly Black friends, and she has to navigate which identity she shows to which people, and who she really is, and whether or not she can use her voice when she sees injustice, even though it's going to cost her. Right. So there's tons of books out there, and there's tons of movies too. You don't have to read something that goes against what you believe. Like you don't have to read something that is has depictions of like teenagers engaging in sex with descriptions of it. But you do have to open yourself to the possibility that some of the content that kids are reading and seeing is going to be stuff that the people around them are doing. So you do have to be open to children talking about, or characters that are children talking about sex, or talking about sexual acts, or talking about being attacked or assaulted or raped, or talking about friends using drugs.
Right.
And you have to be willing to read these things and identify with these characters in a non-judgmental way. If you can do that, that makes you more trustworthy for young people to come to you and to talk to you about these issues, because they know that you have a clue. And they know that you have the language, and they also know that you're not going to shame them because you've dealt with your stuff, because that's number one.
Yes. No, that's really, really good. And I think there's a distinction that you've pointed out between reading information that is erotic in nature and reading information that is descriptive of somebody's real lived experience. And I think particularly for people who've grown up in purity culture, they're not clear on the difference, because all sex is bad if it's outside marriage, and all sex is good if it's in marriage, and that's just not correct. There is sex that is safe outside of marriage, and there's sex that's dangerous inside of marriage, and when you have kind of just that mentality, it's hard for you to see the nuance of what children are going through, and what responses are due to different things. And speaking of like parent responses, you gave us like 3 great tips of how to act or respond, how to educate your children on these things. But in the show, when Amy's mother, when she first sees that her daughter is dressing, wildly different from what they believe she should dress, and, dancing and those types of things, and posting pictures online, she reacts by yelling and slapping her. So like
Right.
some physical assault happening there. Um,
Hmm.
and I think particularly people who come from religious backgrounds, they think that that's how you address this. This is something evil that you have to
Right.
punish out of the person. And then in the film, a little bit after that, they brought in an exorcist, somebody to try to
Yep.
loose her from a demon. And,
Yep.
you know, they poured, I guess, holy water or something like that on her. And then
Absolutely. Yeah.
the the religious figure came in and he talked to her and he said, she's not possessed.
Right. She's
Um,
not.
right. And so how wrong was that? Like, let's talk about,
Yeah.
like, a lot of parents respond that way, and why is that doing exactly the opposite of what we need to have in a
Right.
relationship with children who are being sexualized?
So, the mother is shocked, basically. And I mean, you can understand, I don't condone what the mother does, slapping her and shaming her. I don't think you should shame anybody under any conditions, um, or slap anybody, but
Right. Right.
So, however, slapping and shaming her isn't going to um, create in Ambi a desire to now become a pious Muslim. It's
Right.
just not going to work that way. It's going to actually push her away and make her want to rebel even more, which she, then does.
Mm-hmm.
um, so it's not a way to, invite someone in and say, you know, this is dangerous. I don't, this isn't who you are. Where is this coming from? What's been influencing you? You're not
Right.
going to get any of those answers. You're not going to get any discussion at all, which you
Right.
see with Ami. In a
Right.
lot of the movie, Ami doesn't really have much of a voice. She does develop a bit of a voice in certain scenes, but it's mostly with her friends, not
Right.
with adults, not with her aunt who's enforcing patriarchy, and not with her mother who's grieving patriarchy.
Yeah.
um, so it does the opposite. We know this also from just our culture in general, and specifically from evangelical culture. So 20 years ago we have books like Every Man's Battle come out, right?
Yeah.
So you have a whole bunch of young Christian men that are reading these books, and the Joshua Harris books, and
Yeah.
basically what are they communicating? A whole bunch of shame
Yeah.
about sex, but not just about sex,
Yeah.
also about teenage boys' natural, non-problematic, non-sinful physiological responses to seeing someone they're attracted to, or
Right.
to wanting to look at naked pictures of
Mm-hmm.
people who are people they're attracted to. And
Right.
these are normal developmental desires.
Mm-hmm.
But because the conversation is, again, just don't do it,
Mm-hmm.
shut it down,
Yeah.
don't even look. And I don't mean that the pornography, but like when you're with a girl that you find attractive,
Right.
don't even look at her. Like
Right.
bounce your eyes kind of
Right.
advice.
Right.
What you're actually doing is you're actually teaching the boys that girls are primarily sexual beings. So you're
Mm-hmm.
teaching boys to sexualize them.
Yeah.
And you're also teaching them that everything about them that is sexual or has any kind of desire is
Mm-hmm.
automatically wrong, sinful, shameful. Instead
Right.
of having a conversation with them that's developmentally appropriate, like this is how your
Mm-hmm.
body's going to react. And
Yeah.
part of growing up is learning to control, what you do with those feelings, what you do with your body when it becomes aroused. And, this is what consent is. And these are the important things. The important thing isn't to keep your body from reacting normally. The
Right.
important thing is to choose how to respect other individuals
Yeah.
when your body is reacting normally.
Right.
But
Yes.
they don't
Yes.
even bring up those conversations. And so you have a whole bunch of young men that become adult men that, it's really difficult for them to connect sexually with their partners
Mm-hmm.
because they've never been taught that this is about connection. They've only been taught that this
Right.
is about lust and something shameful. How do you connect with someone if the action you're trying to connect with them with has only been communicated to you as a shameful thing?
Right.
Shame is the thing that keeps you hidden from people.
Yeah.
You need to be able to step through shame in order to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what purity culture is doing to females and males is shaming them for being human.
Yes. Yes. 100%. And um, from like I've heard some stories from my male friends who've come out of purity culture and just how
Mhm.
like later in life they saw a woman in a bikini and they were just like, oh my God, a woman in a bikini. And they were just like
Right.
shocked. And
Mhm.
then they looked around at the other guys and they were just kind of like, nah, whatever. Because like they hadn't been taught their whole life, you can't see that, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
That it created
Mhm.
an overreaction to
Exactly.
what
Right.
they were seeing that would just be like, oh, woman's body. Okay, I'm
Right.
attracted to that. No problem. We're gonna, behave consensually and respectfully. Um,
Right.
and then on the other side, as like a woman myself, I remember the first time I was about. There were two times. One, I might have been 7 or 8, but the one that sticks out to me the most is I was 8 and I was wearing like this dragonfly
Hmm.
tank top, and I loved that thing. I'd worn it the year previous, and it had like little cute capris that matched it. And dragonflies have always been my favorite; they still are. Um, and like I was so excited to get that pulled out of this winter storage closet and get the summer clothes. And I put it on, and
Right.
my mom's like, "Ugh, your dad said that that's too sexualized now. You're getting older." And that was the first time I was like,
Right.
whoa, I never even thought that men would be looking at my little body. Like that was
Right.
not at all where my mind was. And looking back, like it wasn't a sexual top. Like it was a little girl's
Right.
tank top.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think that's the danger of, this hyper purity culture stuff.
Yeah.
That it shuts down healthy sexuality and doesn't allow children to develop healthy
Right.
in healthy ways, and so it can come out in some other unhealthy ways. And that kind of brings us like right into the one of the last questions I want to ask, and that's we talked about some of the overt problematic themes that I think people have really been talking about just all over the internet, but there were
Right.
other things that really stood out to me about patriarchy that I haven't seen people really addressing, that
Right.
really
Yeah.
didn't seem to be an issue to some people. So number one, you have the mom
Right.
who is
Hmm.
realizing she's being replaced by a younger woman, and she's going to have to share her husband with another woman, and
Yeah.
like she doesn't really have option in that. He didn't ask her. And there
Hmm.
are some polygamous relationships where polyamory where people are like consenting adults and they're all into it. But this is more of a
Right.
thing where she didn't have a choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then we also see the grandmother when she talks to the young girl about her period, saying, yeah, when I had my period, it was just, short time later and I got married. So there's some child marriage happening there.
Yeah.
Of course, the strict modesty mandates that aren't choices, but are, again, mandated. The strict gender roles of, the grandmother says something to the effect of, like, this is I'm going to teach you to be a woman today or something like that, and has her granddaughter cut like 5 bags worth of onions. And
Yeah. She actually like locks her in the basement. She's like Cinderella. You're not
right,
allowed to leave until all these onions are
right,
peeled and cut for your father's wedding.
yeah,
And
yeah,
what does she do? She rebels against that too.
right, right, exactly. And so we see all of that. And number one, I'm not seeing a lot of church people, coming out about
No.
sexism,
Right.
because there's a lot of church people, and I'm talking right now about Christian church people. This patriarchy is in
Right.
every religion, but
Yeah.
I mean, I had been talking to a woman who did not sit down at the table, to eat, those types of things with her family because that was the role. I have talked to women who, have to wear these particular strict outfits. Like I had to dress very quote unquote modestly, even as an
Right.
adult woman. Um, so this is really problematic, and it really gives you a reason to want to rebel against that,
Right.
because it's not a
Hmm.
choice. Um,
Yeah.
and when those things are a choice for you personally, more power to you. But
Right.
then
Hmm.
on the other side, you see like the forced and pressured sexualization of the young girl going to school and being bullied for not dressing a certain way, and so you just
Right.
patriarchy is it's all two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to women not having choice but
Yep.
being you either have to be super modest or you have to be super, you know, scandalous in your clothing. And
Right.
if you choose one or the other, I don't care what the heck you wear. I really
Right.
don't. But when it's
Hmm.
not a choice, when it's pressured either overtly by family or, you know, in, you know, more coercive manners in
Yes. Yeah.
society, it's
Hmm. Yeah.
damaging. And it,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'd love to
Hmm.
hear if you got any thoughts about that. But that one hit me in the face seeing those two things there.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the difficulty that the character Ami is dealing with is she has on the one hand her pious traditional family and what their expectations of being a female
Mm-hmm.
is. It's very domestic. It's very pious. You're very
Right.
religious. You're kind of carrying the men through this world by your service to them and by
Mm-hmm.
your religiousness, right?
Right.
And I'm not speaking for all Muslims here. This is just how
Sure. Exactly.
particular
100%.
portrayed in just like not all Christians
Right.
are as extreme. There's also a scale
Yes.
within all religions
Yes.
of oppression and egalitarianism, I guess,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So so she's watching as the women in her family, her mom and the older generation who are trying to enforce these patriarchal rules
Mm-hmm.
that benefit the men in their families. She's
Mm-hmm.
watching them be overlooked and treated poorly and
Mm-hmm.
being replaced. So it's kind
Right.
of like, if this is who I am and what I have to become to be a woman, to be affirmed,
Mm-hmm.
anyone can reject me at any time and do whatever they want anyway.
Yeah.
There's no security in that, right?
Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
on the other side, you have the French culture where, you have all this hypersexuality and stuff. So she becomes friends with these girls. They're all about the
Mm-hmm.
same age. They all do these hypersexual dances. But
Yeah.
there's a scene when Ami goes too far with
Mm-hmm.
the engaging in the social media hypersexualization. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens? Her friends reject her.
Yeah.
You can, you can do the whole whatever you want to do for the male gaze and for
Yeah.
men and for boys to get affirmation. But if you step out of line and go a little too far,
Yeah.
then we reject you. Now you're a slut and something worse. And the
Exactly.
boys in school even joined in on that. And then there's the whole bullying scene. So
Right.
she's beginning to realize that the expectations of girls in both cultures,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, are just, well, they're terrible because
Mm-hmm.
and none of it has to do with who she is, what she wants to do, what she likes, how she wants to dress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that one of the best juxtapositionings in the movie that the director does that's actually brilliant is what you talked about before with the
Mm-hmm.
possession scene where they try to do like an exorcism. So you have Ami, she's wearing these skimpy outfits and
Mm-hmm.
she's dancing in this provocative manner, doing this twerking and kind of gyrating thing, right? And to her pious family, that's not allowed. You
Right.
can't do that. It's a sexual context.
Right.
However, when they bring her to the exorcist,
Mm-hmm.
puts the water on her and she starts to gyrate and dance in little clothing and
Mm-hmm.
she's gyrating and shaking in a way that could be sexual if you have the right music to it, but
Right.
because it's in a religious context and not a sexual one,
Yeah.
then it's totally fine. So it's kind of like you have these dueling competing
Mm-hmm.
expectations and it's really just the same stuff but in a different way.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what I saw.
Yeah. No, that's so important. Patriarchy, whichever way it goes, it's deadly, it's dangerous, it's harmful. I think unfortunately with this film, they were trying to do a good thing, but some patriarchy got in there, and they decided to
Right.
sexualize children, and
Right.
that was a thumbs down for me,
Problematic.
pretty hard thumbs
Yes.
down. Yeah.
Yes.
um, yeah, and before we take a quick break, I do want to just say Maureen mentioned this, and I'll just echo it as well. While the film was set with a family that was Muslim, this is in no way bashing the Muslim families, Islam. There are very feminist, beyond feminist Muslim women that I know who are empowered. And if you want to wrap a headscarf around your head and that is empowering to you,
Yep.
do it.
Go for it. Yep.
Also,
Mm-hmm.
if you are an adult, not a child, and you want
Right.
to wear very little clothing, more power to you. make sure
Yep.
it's done in the proper environments.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, there should be choice
Yeah.
about these things. I think that's feminism. That's equality, is when there's choice to it. So yeah, just
Yes.
wanted to reiterate that again. But
Hmm.
we're gonna take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with Maureen.
So there's choices that you have the opportunity to make. You can either stay with your abuser or you can leave. And make no mistake about it, it's going to be hard either way you go. But I can tell you one thing for sure. If you do decide to make that courageous decision to go, there's hope. So much hope.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Courage 365 show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter, and I have been interviewing Maureen Farrell Garcia, and we've been talking about cuties and the sexualization of children in our culture. And it's just been a really great topic. If you're just tuning in right now, you are going to want to definitely catch the replay of this, because you're not going to want to miss any of what we talked about. It's just been so deep and nuanced, and I think nuanced to a point where you're not really going to catch this type of in-depth conversation anywhere else in the media. We're not really seeing these nuances anywhere else. I think that's why this conversation was super important to have. And go ahead and hit the share button right now if you've been enjoying the show so far, just so your friends and family members can see this, because we've had such important topics on how parents can interact with their children while children are experiencing this highly sexualized culture, and kind of understanding how to navigate that. So please go ahead and hit the share button. But Maureen, thank you so much for everything. Are there any, before I ask you some of our final questions, are there any other thoughts you want to add before we kind of shift gears a little bit?
Not really. I mean, other than the fact that I'm glad that people are talking about this, whatever instigated it, because it is an important topic to, we need to have a cultural shift, so that our children, male and female, aren't subjected to hypersexualized content all the time.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I love that so much. Thank you. And I know I asked you this the last time. We asked this on every show at the end. But it's, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? And so maybe I want to shift that a little, since you've answered that before.
Yeah.
But like, what is one of the best pieces of advice you've received, or something that's impacting you right now today?
So, so a number of years ago, after I found out that the man I was married to, the Christian man I was married to, was a child molester, and within a week of finding that out, him and I are then separated, and I'm dealing with the trauma of that. I'm dealing with how do I interact with my kids now that we know this about their father? How do I live past this? How do I trust myself? How do I trust God? How do I trust other people? And so I'm in this crisis of faith, and I'm going through all these kind of trauma responses with my body and stuff. And a friend of mine at the time said to me something along the lines of, this is okay, you got this, that you're going to learn through this, that you can reach beyond the extent of your arm. And I said, I don't know what you mean, and whatever it is, that's not happening. And now I look back and I see it all the time, that the person I am now, I wouldn't have been able to imagine could exist. But with all the support that I've had, and with all the therapy that I've had, and all the prayer that I've had, and and all the education I've had about these kind of topics, about abuse dynamics and about recovery from abuse, and preventing abuse, I realized I've reached beyond the length of my arm. And so for anybody out there, if you think that you are stuck in a place right now, this too will pass. At some point, you'll reach beyond the length of your arm.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's so powerful. So many times our greatest pain, we can leverage it as a launching point for, the rest of our lives in a positive way. It doesn't at all negate the pain or justify the pain.
Absolutely not. Never any justification for the abuse.
Right. Never, never.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen you and so many other people launch themselves from that place into something really beautiful, and that just is a testament to your courage and strength, and I want to thank you for sharing that.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, how can people follow you? How can they get connected? I know after this riveting conversation they're gonna want to follow more of your work.
So you can find me. I have a website. It's Maureen, Maureen F Garcia, GARCIA.com, and I'm also on Twitter at M Farrell, Farrell Garcia, GARCIA at Twitter.
Awesome, awesome. And Will, if you are in the comment threads typing away, which I hope that you are, if you wouldn't mind dropping that
I will.
web address, Maureen, would you say that one more time for us so people can visit your
Okay.
website?
MaureenFGarcia.com.
Awesome. MaureenFGarcia.com. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom here. I really think this is valuable for parents, grandparents, anybody who engages with children, teachers, all those things. Yeah, I'm honored to have you have been on our show. Thank you so, so much. Everybody go ahead and check out her website and social media. And I'd also just invite you to come and follow Courage 365. We are on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and on YouTube. But I realize there's a little bit of an error here with the Facebook. It says Courage 365 as kind of our backslash after facebook.com, but it's actually courage365.org, O-R-G, or you can just search Courage 365 on Facebook and you should be able to find us. But yes, I am really glad that you all tuned in. I know this was kind of a heavy topic, but I hope that it was as educational for you as it was for me. Definitely follow us on social media. Hit up our YouTube channel. We need just a few more subscribers before we hit 100. And when we do that, get our custom URL, and then we can reach so many more people. So please go ahead and do that. I also want to tell you to go on to courage365.org, and there you can download our free ebook, 5 Keys to Living a Life of Courage. This is for survivors who are just kind of beginning to realize they've experienced some abuse and looking for next steps forward to healing and empowerment. And I want you to know, if you're listening to this episode at the time where we're airing it, keep an eye out on our social media. This is another reason to give us a follow, because in October, we have a special online event that's going to be happening. I don't have all the details to share with you yet, but we're going to be dropping information about that this coming week. It's going to be good. It's going to be free. You are not going to want to miss it if you identify as an abuse survivor or an advocate. So keep a lookout for that. Everybody, I hope you are having a good week and continue to live in courage.